My name is Diana Mercer. I am 67 years old, and until a few weeks ago, I believed I was simply a retired school librarian trying to survive the sudden death of my husband, Harold. I had no idea that within days of his passing, I would be standing in front of a powerful office door, replaying the words that started everything, the words that would become the image on every thumbnail of this story. When my husband passed away, his wealthy boss called me and said, "I found something. Come to my office right now." Then he added, "And do not tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in danger." I remember gripping the phone so tightly that my fingers shook. His tone was low and urgent, not the kind used to offer condolences, but the tone used when someone is about to reveal a truth that can ruin a family. The next morning, when I arrived at his building and saw who was standing at the door, I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My mind spun in disbelief. That moment was the first sign that the life I thought I understood was already slipping away from me. Yet, to truly understand why that call shattered me, you need to know where I had stood just hours earlier. I had been standing alone in the front pew of my husband's funeral while the people around me acted as if I were a fragile stranger. After 42 years of marriage, I was treated like a ceremonial afterthought. My son, Ethan, greeted guests in my place. His wife, Brooke, directed the service as if she had been Harold's partner for decades. I heard whispers beside me, sharp enough to pierce through my ribs. "Diana is starting to slip," Brooke murmured to someone. "We will handle everything. She should not make decisions right now." Every word stung like a quiet betrayal. The sound of the funeral horn was heavy and somber, yet the whispered judgments were heavier. They clung to me longer than grief. People approached Ethan to offer condolences. They hugged Brooke as if she were the grieving widow. I stood there, unseen. The woman who had shared a lifetime with Harold, erased in a single morning. That night, the house was full, but I was alone in every possible way. Conversations buzzed through the walls, footsteps echoed, plates clattered in the kitchen. Despite all that noise, there was a terrible silence inside me, the kind that sits behind the ribs and waits. I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing the black dress from the funeral, my fingers brushing the silver medallion Harold had given me on our wedding day. Inside it was a pressed lavender sprig, faded with time. I had worn it out of habit, out of devotion, out of a wish that someone might see me the way he once did. Then the phone rang, a cold, abrupt sound that sliced through the quiet. I hesitated before answering. Grief had made the world unpredictable. But when I lifted the receiver, the voice that came through was unmistakably serious. "Diana, this is Jonathan Reyes, Harold's, supervisor. I found something. You need to come to my office tomorrow morning. Do not tell Ethan. Do not tell Brooke. You may be in danger." His words were clear, crisp, and delivered without hesitation. My heart pounded in my chest. I whispered a question, but Jonathan cut me off gently. "It is safer if we speak in person." When the call ended, I sat still for a long time, the room dim, the air cold, the house still buzzing with guests who barely remembered I existed. My hand clutched the medallion, the lavender inside it pressed flat like my own voice. I thought losing Harold had been the deepest point of my grief, the absolute bottom. I was wrong. That phone call was the door to a different kind of darkness, one built not from death, but from betrayal and hidden intentions. And this is where my story truly begins. If you're listening, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your support helps these quiet stories of courage and justice reach more people who might need them. Now let me tell you what happened next, and why Jonathan's warning changed everything I thought I knew about my own family. The morning of Harold's funeral began with a kind of silence that felt unnatural, the kind that stretches across the walls before anyone speaks. I arrived early, out of habit rather than purpose, and found myself guided to the front pew by one of the attendants. It was the seat meant for a wife, yet the moment I sat, I realized the room was moving around me without ever acknowledging me. People drifted past in slow waves, offering their condolences to my son, Ethan, rather than to me. He stood near the aisle with his hand resting on the back of a chair, as if he were the one who had shared 42 years with Harold. Guests shook his hand, embraced him, and spoke with reverence, while I sat in silence, watching my own life play out as though I were only a witness. Ethan adjusted the microphone at the podium and spoke with the authority of someone used to giving orders. He told the funeral director where to seat Harold's distant relatives and instructed the ushers on how to guide the flow of people. Every detail passed through him. When someone approached to ask about the order of the service, they asked him. When the minister inquired about the eulogy, Ethan answered before I even opened my mouth. There was a part of me that wanted to speak, not because I had something prepared, but because I had lived every chapter of Harold's life with him. Yet it became clear that no one expected or wanted my voice that morning. Brooke slid into the pew beside me with a soft sigh, the kind of sound people use when pretending to be concerned. She reached for my hand gently, her fingers cool against mine. She lowered her voice in a way that suggested care, but carried something sharper underneath. "Mom, you should rest today. Let us handle everything. It is better for you." Her tone was sweet. Her message was not. There was a quiet dismissal inside her words, a subtle rewriting of who I was supposed to be. I nodded because grief had drained the strength from my throat, and answering her felt like lifting a stone, yet the weight of her statement settled into my chest. Grief can make a person vulnerable, but it can also reveal the intentions of those around them. Brooke's intentions were becoming clearer by the hour. As the organ played the first hymn, I pressed my hand over the silver medallion resting against my collarbone. Harold had given it to me on our wedding day. Inside it lay a tiny sprig of lavender he had picked from the garden behind the church where we exchanged vows. I remembered the way he had slipped the necklace into my hand, the way he whispered that lavender reminded him of strength that grows quietly. It had become my anchor across decades of marriage. As I touched it now, the memory felt like a soft reminder that I had once been truly seen by someone, even if the world today seemed intent on looking past me. While I sat lost in that memory, a gentle hand touched my shoulder. I turned and saw Clara Whitaker, my neighbor for more than 12 years. She was a widow as well, a woman who had known her own share of heartache. Her eyes met mine with a steadiness that told me she saw everything I felt but could not say. Clara did not speak immediately. When she did, her voice was low and sincere. "If you need anything, come to me. No questions asked. Just knock." Her kindness was so different from the polished sympathy given by others. There was no pity in her eyes, only recognition and respect. In that moment, Clara became a mirror to a version of myself I feared was slipping away. She reminded me that dignity can survive even the harshest grief. As the ceremony continued, Ethan stood with the minister at the front. I watched him lean in slightly, speaking with quiet conviction. Though the church was filled with soft music, I heard enough of their exchange to understand the meaning. "My mother is not in any condition to speak today. I will represent the family." The words struck me harder than I expected. Grief had made my voice tremble. Yes, but it had not taken my mind. Hearing my son declare that I was unfit to speak at my husband's funeral carried an undertone that I could not ignore. It was framed as protection, but it felt like erasure, the kind that leaves you present but powerless. I saw the minister nod, accepting Ethan's words without question, and I felt the space around me shrink. When the service ended, people approached me with soft smiles yet directed their gratitude toward Ethan for organizing such a thoughtful memorial. I remained a symbol rather than a participant, a presence rather than a voice. It was only when the sanctuary had nearly emptied that I overheard the conversation that turned the air cold around me. Ethan stood with Brooke a few steps behind the podium. His voice was low but sharp, enough for me to catch. "After the funeral is the best time to handle the paperwork. Jonathan will need to speak with me, not her. Not her, not me. The wife, the partner, the person standing a few feet away." The medallion felt heavier against my chest. Something inside me tightened, a mixture of fear and awakening. I did not know yet what paperwork Ethan meant. I did not know yet why my son believed Harold's employer should speak to him rather than to me. But the unease that settled into my bones told me the truth long before the facts reached my ears. Something was wrong, and the funeral was only the beginning. The reception after the funeral moved to my home, although for most of the afternoon it felt less like my home and more like a stage I had been quietly escorted off. People arrived carrying casseroles, bouquets, and sorrow that sounded rehearsed. My living room filled quickly with the hum of voices, the clinking of plates, and the occasional forced laugh that always seems to appear at gatherings meant for grief. I stood near the doorway at first, watching a crowd that did not seem to need me, even though it was my life that had been undone. Brooke moved through the kitchen with the confidence of someone who had lived here for years. She opened cabinets without hesitation. She reorganized my serving trays. She adjusted the thermostat because she thought the house was too warm. Every time a guest asked where to place a dish, she answered. Every time someone wondered who prepared the coffee, Brooke smiled and raised her hand. She carried herself like the hostess of the day, and the guests responded to her as if she were the rightful anchor of the home. Ethan followed closely behind her, greeting people with a steady hand on their shoulders. When someone asked about arrangements for the coming days, he explained them as though I had already agreed. I watched from across the room as a woman from Harold's office approached Ethan and said, "How's your mother holding up?" Instead of directing her toward me, he answered on my behalf. "She's adjusting. We are taking care of things." The woman nodded, satisfied, and moved on. I felt the words hang in the air like an invisible curtain. He is taking care of things, not with me, not beside me, but instead of me. I wondered when that subtle shift had begun, when my role had been replaced so quietly that I almost missed it. A man with kind eyes approached holding a paper plate of food. He glanced at me with a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Mercer, do you know where the extra napkins are?" Before I could answer, Brooke called out from behind him. "Top cabinet to the right of the fridge. I will grab them." He turned away from me and thanked her. I watched her glide toward the cabinet without pause, reaching for napkins stored in a drawer she had no rightful familiarity with. There was something jarring about seeing someone so comfortably inhabit a space I had curated for decades. Each gesture she made felt like a quiet rewriting of ownership, a slow redirection of authority. I wondered if anyone else saw it or if grief had made me more sensitive to the edges of things. As conversations continued around me, my attention drifted to a small silver frame on the side table. It held a photo of Harold and me taken during our first year of marriage. In the picture, we were young, sunburned from the July heat, and standing in front of our house with pride. I wore a ring on my left hand that no longer existed. The ring had belonged to my grandmother, passed down through generations, a piece of family history. The memory stirred something deeper. Years ago, during a difficult period when Harold had lost his job, we received notice that our mortgage was overdue. I remembered sitting at the small kitchen table with the overdue statement between us. Harold held his head in his hands, apologizing again and again. I stood, walked quietly to the bedroom, and returned with the ring box. He protested, but I placed the ring in his palm with a steady voice. We needed the money. Our home mattered more than any heirloom. I never told Ethan about the sacrifice. Some things a mother does in silence, not for recognition, but for survival. Today, as I watched my home buzz with people who barely saw me, that memory pressed itself against my ribs with unexpected force. Near the dining table, Brooke stood speaking with two friends. Her voice floated through the crowd, bright and clear enough to be heard. "We need to make plans quickly. She cannot live alone in this house forever. It is too dangerous for her." Her friends nodded, murmuring agreement. Something inside me tightened. Her words had been shaped like concern, yet carved with something cooler beneath them. I replayed them in my mind, weighing each possibility. Was she worried for me, or was she planning around me? The line between care and control can be thin. Grief has a way of clarifying that. I stepped into the hallway to take a breath. The noise of the house softened behind me, turning to a low murmur. I rested my hand against the wall to steady myself. The air in the hallway carried the faint scent of lavender from the medallion at my neck. It was the one perfume Harold had always loved. For a moment, it comforted me, grounding me in something I understood. Then my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting perhaps a message from Clara or a kind neighbor checking on me. Instead, I saw a name that brought me back to the warning that had begun to unravel everything. Jonathan Reyes. My pulse quickened. The timing felt ominous, as if the layers beneath this day were shifting faster than I could stop them. I answered. "Diana, this is important," Jonathan said. "You need to come in tomorrow. Do not delay." His voice carried the same urgency as before, perhaps sharper now. The hallway felt colder. The noise of the reception faded behind me, and I held the phone tightly, aware that whatever he had discovered was larger than grief, larger than paperwork, larger than the quiet erosion of my place in my own family. This call was not a condolence. It was a warning. And I felt, for the first time, that something unseen was already moving toward me. Jonathan's voice still echoed in my ear long after the call had ended. The reception continued behind me, filled with polite chatter and the muted rhythm of forks against porcelain, but everything around me seemed strangely distant. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stood in the quiet hallway, feeling the edges of the day sharpen. Grief had already reshaped so much of my world, yet this new urgency carried a different weight, one that felt heavier than loss. I took a slow breath and stepped farther into the hallway, away from the doorway where guests passed. My hand lifted instinctively to the silver medallion resting against my chest. The metal felt cool under my fingertips, grounding, steady. I pressed it firmly, as if Harold's memory could anchor me to a truth I had not yet uncovered. Jonathan's warning pulsed in my thoughts. "Come in tomorrow. Do not delay." The words seemed too sharp for a day meant for mourning. I tried to make sense of them, but grief has a way of fogging the mind, so questions rose and collided without resolution. Why did he sound more urgent than before? Why now? And why me? The most unsettling question of all surfaced slowly, refusing to be ignored. Why could I not tell my son? That question wrapped itself around my chest like a tightening ribbon. I leaned lightly against the wall, listening to the muted sounds from the living room. Ethan's voice drifted through the doorway, calm and familiar. For so many years, that voice had meant safety. He had been my only child, the boy who once held my hand tightly at school drop-offs, the teenager who checked on me late at night when Harold worked overtime. Yet the man speaking now felt like someone I was still trying to recognize. I replayed Jonathan's first warning from the night before. "Do not tell Ethan. Do not tell Brooke. You may be in danger." At the time, I had assumed it was a misunderstanding, perhaps an overreaction from someone overwhelmed by Harold's sudden passing. People say strange things when they are grieving, but twice. 2 warnings, same urgency, same insistence. It was no coincidence. My fingers tightened around the medallion again, as if the lavender inside it could offer clarity. I closed my eyes briefly and felt the familiar pulse of fear building in my chest. It was not the loud, dramatic kind. It was the quiet kind, the kind that sits in the corner of a mind and whispers, "What if?" I had trusted Ethan my entire life. I had believed in the goodness of my son the way mothers do. Yet Jonathan's caution carved a thin crack in that belief. I pushed myself off the wall and walked slowly toward the guest bathroom to collect myself. My footsteps seemed to echo more loudly than usual on the hardwood floor. When I shut the door behind me, the muted noise of the reception faded further, replaced by the steady sound of my own breath. I stood at the sink, fingertips brushing the cold porcelain edge. I stared at the reflection in the mirror, surprised by the exhaustion in my own eyes. "Why would he say that?" I whispered to myself. "Why would Jonathan insist that I keep something from my own child?" I searched my reflection for answers it could not give. Was this paranoia brought on by grief? Was I imagining connections where none existed? Or was I finally noticing things I had ignored out of love? The conversation I overheard at the funeral returned to me. Ethan told the minister that I was not in the right state to speak. His certainty, his confidence in deciding for me, and then the far more unsettling comment afterward. "Jonathan will need to speak with me. Not her, not her." The phrase repeated like a small hammer inside my ribs. Ethan had spoken it with such casual authority, as if it were a simple fact, as if he were the rightful interpreter of my life and losses. It stung when I heard it. Now it carries a different kind of weight. It felt connected to Jonathan's warnings. I just did not know how. A knock sounded at the bathroom door. Brooke's voice followed. "Mom, are you all right? Do you need anything?" Her tone was polite, almost gentle, yet it carried that familiar sweetness that always seemed to coat something firmer underneath. I forced my voice into steadiness. "I am fine. I will be out shortly." She lingered for a moment before walking away. I listened to her footsteps fade, then pressed my hand to the medallion again. Harold had once told me that lavender symbolized quiet strength. I held on to that now because I needed strength more than clarity. The truth, whatever it was, felt close enough to touch yet too foggy to see. When I re-entered the hallway, I saw Ethan thanking a departing guest. He caught my eye and offered a smile. It was the smile of a son trying to reassure his mother. Yet now, with Jonathan's warning echoing in my mind, even that smile carried questions. Was he protecting me? Or was he protecting something else? The doubt that formed in that instant was small, thin, almost delicate. But doubt, once born, does not disappear. It settles. It waits. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if my son was truly on my side. I did not want to think about it. I did not want to believe it. Yet the warning from Harold's boss would not leave me. Tomorrow would bring answers, but it would also bring the beginning of something I was not prepared to face. I arrived downtown the next morning with a sense of unease that clung to my shoulders like a weight. The sky was a muted gray, and the tall glass buildings reflected the same dull color, giving the entire district a severe and imposing tone. Jonathan had told me to come. Early. Still, even in the early hour, the financial district pulsed with the stiff, determined rhythm of people who moved with purpose. They knew exactly why they were there. I was the only person walking in without answers. The building where Jonathan worked towered above the others. Its glass walls shimmered with a cold sheen, and the revolving doors spun with a quiet confidence. I stepped through them, immediately engulfed by a lobby that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. Marble floors stretched out in perfect symmetry. Modern art hung in frames too expensive to understand. The ceiling rose impossibly high, making me aware of how little space I occupied in comparison. My footsteps echoed softly as I approached the reception desk. The receptionist, a young woman with neatly tied hair and a measured smile, looked up as I arrived. "Good morning. How may I assist you?" I cleared my throat subtly, aware that my voice felt thinner in this vast space. "I have an appointment with Jonathan Reyes." She typed quickly, scanning the screen with professional detachment. After a moment, she looked up again, her expression shifting slightly. "May I confirm your name?" "Diana Mercer." Her eyes sharpened with a hint of curiosity, though she masked it quickly. "Mrs. Mercer, are you the legal spouse?" "The only legal spouse on record." The question struck me harder than expected. I felt my breath falter. "I was married to Harold for 42 years. Yes, I am his only wife." She nodded politely, but her question lingered in my mind like a stone dropped in still water. Why would she need to ask that? What records was she referring to? What had surfaced that made that question necessary? My heart gave a quiet tremor. "Mr. Reyes will see you shortly," she said. "You may take the elevator to the 12th floor. Someone will meet you there." I thanked her and walked toward the elevator, my fingers brushing the medallion at my collarbone. The lavender inside felt delicate, almost fragile. I held it because I needed something familiar, something mine. The elevator chimed softly and I stepped inside. Its walls were lined with brushed metal that reflected my image in muted distortions. I watched myself, small and tense, as the floors ticked upward. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, I stepped out into a hallway lined with frosted glass. Soft lights glowed behind each panel. Every detail felt intentional, polished, powerful. I took a slow breath to steady myself, then followed the signs toward Jonathan's office. At the end of the corridor was a large wooden door with his nameplate beside it. My steps slowed, my pulse quickened. Before I could knock, the door opened. But the person standing there was not Jonathan. It was Clara Whitaker. For a moment, my mind could not reconcile what I was seeing. Clara, with her kind eyes and calm presence. Clara, who had given me gentle comfort at the funeral. Clara, who lived 2 houses down and lent me gardening tools every summer. She stood in a tailored blazer instead of her usual sweater, her posture firm, her expression steady. "Diana," she said, her voice quiet but certain. "Please come in." I stepped inside slowly, confusion gathering like a storm cloud. The office was spacious, filled with sleek furniture and neatly stacked files. The blinds were drawn, allowing soft, filtered light to fall across the room. I turned toward her, my voice unsteady. "Clara, what are you doing here? Where is Jonathan?" She closed the door carefully before answering. "Jonathan is here, but he asked me to speak with you first." "Why? What is going on?" There was a pause as Clara studied me, her eyes filled with a seriousness I had never seen in her. No pity, not concerned, something much more deliberate. "Diana," she said, "I work in internal investigations for this company. Harold came to me months ago. He trusted me with something important." The words hit me with a slow, spreading force. "Investigations," I repeated quietly. "Harold came to you." She nodded. "He asked me to watch over certain records, to protect them if anything ever happened to him, and he asked me to look out for you." My knees weakened slightly, and I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. "Protect me from what?" Clara walked toward the desk and placed a hand on a locked drawer. Harold discovered irregularities involving his name and his accounts. When he tried to address them, he realized someone close to him had accessed his personal information. My stomach tightened. Someone close to him. Clara hesitated only long enough to show she understood the blow she was delivering. "He believed Ethan was being influenced, and he feared that you might be at risk because of it." The room felt suddenly colder. I pressed my hand to the medallion, gripping it as if it could anchor me in a moment that no longer felt real. Lavender and silver, memory and truth. I had worn it for comfort. Now I held it to survive clarity. Clara stepped closer, her voice gentler but steady. "Harold did not want to scare you. He wanted to make sure that if anything happened to him, you would not be blindsided." I swallowed hard, feeling grief and betrayal twist together in a way that made breathing difficult. Why did no one tell me sooner? "Because Harold insisted on waiting until he had undeniable proof," Clara said. "Jonathan warned you because that moment has arrived." I closed my eyes for a brief second. Harold had trusted Clara. He had asked her to protect me, and now I stood in the center of a truth I had never imagined. Clara's voice softened. "Diana, I need you to sit. There is something you need to see." And just like that, the first layer of Harold's secret began to unfold. Clara motioned for me to sit, and I lowered myself into the chair across from her desk, my fingers still gripping the medallion at my neckline. The room felt too still, as though the air itself understood that something irreversible was about to unfold. Clara unlocked the drawer with a small metallic key, the sound sharp in the quiet office. She pulled out a thick, sealed folder. My name was written across the front in Harold's handwriting. Seeing his penmanship again was like being pulled backward in time. His letters were steady, neat, deliberate. The sight alone made my throat tighten. Clara set the folder gently in front of me. "Harold gave me these documents. He wanted them kept safe until the moment he could no longer protect you himself." My breath wavered. I unfastened the clasp with careful fingers. Inside, the folder opened like a slow exhale, revealing stacks of papers, stamped copies, and printed forms. Everything smelled faintly of toner and old envelopes. Clara slid the first set toward me. "I want you to look at these. Take your time." The top document was a high-resolution scan of a legal contract. At first, I recognized Harold's name typed neatly on the lines, but as my eyes followed the text downward, the meaning drew itself into focus in a way that made my pulse stutter. It was a transfer of ownership agreement, not from Harold to me, but from Harold's estate to Ethan. Entire sections detailed the reassignment of assets: the house, the savings account, Harold's retirement, and even the small parcel of land he inherited from his uncle years ago. The signature at the bottom looked like Harold's, but something about it felt wrong, not forged, not sloppy, just pressured. My hand trembled slightly as I touched the page. Why would this exist? Harold would never sign away our assets without telling me. Clara nodded slowly. The contract is real, but the circumstances surrounding its creation raised doubts. Harold believed someone had pushed for it. He wanted to understand who and why. Before I could respond, she handed me a second document. It was a long-term care evaluation form, partially filled out. At the top was my full legal name. Beneath it, several fields were completed in handwriting I recognized immediately. Not Harold's, Ethan's. The form suggested an assessment to determine whether I required supervision, assistance, or placement in an assisted living facility. My chest tightened as I read the words. Cognitive decline, safety concerns, need for oversight. My breath caught as I whispered, "This is about me." Clara answered with a steady voice. Harold found this in a shared drive he and Ethan used years ago. It was drafted but never submitted, but someone clearly intended for it to be. I stared at the form, unable to speak. Images flashed through my mind. Ethan answering questions for the minister at the funeral. Ethan telling people he was taking care of things. Ethan insisting I was too fragile to speak. They all threaded together in a pattern I had not wanted to see. I set the form down, but my fingers refused to release it entirely. He was preparing to declare me incapable. Clara didn't deny it. Harold feared the same. That is why he came to us. My chest felt too tight for air. I looked again at the transfer contract, then at the care evaluation. 2 documents, 2 paths leading to the same conclusion. Someone had been building a narrative about me, about my mind, about my place. Clara slid one more page across the desk, a handwritten note. The paper was slightly wrinkled at the edge, as though Harold had folded and unfolded it many times. This, Clara said, was the part he struggled with the most. I lifted the note carefully, afraid my fingers might smudge the words. The handwriting was unmistakably Harold's. The strokes were firm, though uneven at the end, as if written in a rush. Ethan believes his mother is no longer of sound mind. The words blurred for a moment as tears formed. I blinked hard to clear them. Seeing the claim on paper, written by Harold himself, felt like being struck by something cold and heavy. A statement like that could strip a person of their autonomy, their home, their dignity. I whispered the sentence aloud, my voice thin. He thinks I am not of sound mind. Clara watched me gently. Harold wanted you to know the truth, not the version others tried to shape. He feared Ethan was being influenced and that someone was pushing him to take over the household and assets before the time was right. Harold wanted to protect you from any attempt to undermine your independence. My hand pressed the medallion again, harder this time. The lavender inside felt like a memory of steadiness I desperately needed. I thought of the sacrifices I had made for Ethan, the nights I had stayed up teaching him, the ring I sold to keep our home. To imagine him believing I was slipping mentally, or worse, using that belief for advantage, tore through me in a way I was not prepared to feel. I forced my voice steady. Did Harold ever say why Ethan believed that? Clara shook her head gently. He suspected Brooke's influence, but he could not prove it. What he could prove was the pattern. Changes to accounts, attempts to access records, preparations for evaluations. I leaned back slowly, letting the truth settle. It did not land all at once. It sank gradually, like a weight lowering into water. Clara reached across the desk, not touching me, but offering presence. You are not imagining any of this, Diana. Harold uncovered it, he documented it, and he trusted you to face it with clarity. I lifted the note again, reading Harold's words until they steadied themselves on the page. My son believed I was losing my mind, but I was seeing everything with painful clarity, and nothing would ever be the same. Clara remained standing beside the desk when the door opened again. This time, Jonathan Reyes stepped in. Quietly, his expression solemn but controlled. He gave me a respectful nod before taking the seat across from me. There was no small talk, no gentle easing into the conversation. The air in the room felt charged, as though every word spoken from this point forward would carry weight. "Diana," he began, folding his hands together, "I know today has already been overwhelming, but Harold trusted me to make sure you understood the full picture before any decisions were made." My voice came out steady, though I felt anything but. Clara showed me some of what Harold discovered. The contracts, the evaluation forms. I still do not understand why any of this was happening behind my back. Jonathan exhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. Harold came to us because he realized someone was trying to reposition control of his estate. The company has a built-in internal protection system for employees dealing with sensitive financial matters. He qualified for that protection due to the nature of his role. It meant that when he flagged concerns, our department had a responsibility to investigate quietly and thoroughly. I absorbed his words carefully. So, Harold was being monitored, not because he was in trouble, but because he needed support. Jonathan nodded. Exactly. He was not alone, and he did everything he could to make sure you would not be left unprotected. His reassurance steadied me for a moment, but only until he opened the next file on the desk. This is where the situation becomes more complicated. He turned the folder so that it faced me. Inside were printed screenshots of bank activity logs. Some lines were highlighted in yellow. I leaned in, reading slowly. My name appeared at the top of each page. "Why are these accounts under my name?" I asked. Jonathan tapped the page with the end of his pen. "Because they were opened using your information, not by you. Harold found the inconsistencies 3 months ago." My stomach tightened. "Then who opened them?" "Ethan," Jonathan said gently. "Using a joint access portal he had from years ago when he helped Harold manage online billing. He created sub-accounts that mirrored your legitimate ones, but diverted information and activity toward his own access points." Cold pressure spread across my chest. It felt foreign to imagine my son behind something like this, but the evidence was right there in front of me, printed line by line. Jonathan continued. "Harold believed Ethan may not have fully understood the legality or the consequences, but he feared someone would encourage him to take advantage of the access he already had." I did not need Jonathan to name that someone. Brooke's face surfaced in my mind with startling clarity. Her polite control, her subtle redirections, her quiet insistence that she and Ethan were already taking care of everything. Jonathan placed another document on the table. This one struck even deeper. It was a long-term care evaluation request, filed formally, submitted. My breath faltered. I thought it was just a draft. Clara showed me the unsent form. Jonathan hesitated. "It was a draft, but a second version was submitted 2 weeks ago. It has not been processed yet. That is why Harold came to us again." My voice lowered to barely above a whisper. "Brooke." Clara nodded gently. "It was filed using her employee account from the health administration office she works for. She has access to early screening systems. She likely believed she was preparing for the future, but on paper, it reads as an attempt to establish diminished capacity for you. Diminished capacity." The words held a frightening kind of authority, capable of rearranging a person's life with a few strokes of ink. Jonathan leaned forward slightly. "Diana, once a long-term care evaluation is approved, control over major financial and medical decisions can shift. In many cases, it ends with a court-appointed guardian. Harold feared that if this process began without your knowledge, your autonomy could be challenged." I felt a wave of dizziness ripple through me. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just quiet and devastating. The kind of feeling that makes a person sit down a little deeper in their chair. Clara spoke softly. "Harold trusted your clarity. He trusted your mind. He wanted these documents kept safe so you would know exactly what was being done in your name." I swallowed tightly, searching for breath. My own son, filing accounts under my name, allowing his wife to submit evaluations about my mind without saying a single word to me. Jonathan's voice was steady, careful. "This is not about blame. It is about knowledge and protection. You are here today because Harold insisted that you deserve the truth. I pressed my palm over the medallion again, feeling the coolness of the silver beneath my fingers. For the first time since Harold's death, I felt something new rising inside me. Not grief, not fear, something steadier, something that felt like the first step toward reclaiming the ground beneath my feet. "Tell me what I need to do," I said. Both Clara and Jonathan exchanged a look, because everything was about to change. I drove home from the financial district with Jonathan's files on the passenger seat beside me. The folder felt heavier than anything I had ever carried, as though Harold's final warnings were sealed inside the weight of that paper. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the late afternoon light had softened, casting long shadows across the porch. For the first time in days, the house looked unfamiliar. I stepped inside quietly. The silence wrapped around me like a thin layer of armor. I placed the folder on the dining table and stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, letting the truth sink into every corner of the house that my sacrifices had once held together. I had barely taken off my coat when I heard a car door slam. Footsteps approached. Voices followed. I recognized them immediately, Ethan and Brooke. They entered without knocking, out of habit rather than entitlement, though today it felt like the latter. Ethan walked in first, still wearing the concerned expression he used when trying to appear dutiful. Brooke hovered close behind him, her hands clasped, her face arranged into soft worry. "Mom," Ethan said, "we need to talk. We came as soon as we heard you left the reception early." "I needed air," I replied. My voice was calm, but it carried a firmness neither of them expected. Brooke stepped forward. "We are worried about you. You have been acting overwhelmed. We think it is time we discussed a plan, something stable, something safe." Safe. The word landed like a stone. I moved slowly to the dining table and pulled out a chair. "Sit," I said. Something in my tone made them obey before exchanging nervous glances. I sat across from them, placing my hand lightly on the sealed envelope I had prepared. It sat between us like a quiet witness. Ethan cleared his throat. "Mom, the house is too big for you. You should not be alone right now. We were thinking Brooke could help you organize things, maybe help with the paperwork, bills, medical decisions." Medical decisions. The timing was stunning in its cruelty. I looked directly at him. "Is that why you opened accounts in my name?" His expression froze, confusion flickering into panic before he could hide it. Brooke's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Ethan said quickly. "Who told you that?" "I saw the documents." Brooke leaned forward, her voice pitched into sweetness. "There must be a misunderstanding. Those accounts were for convenience, just to help manage things. You know how complicated finances can get." I kept my gaze steady. "And the long-term care evaluation, was that for convenience too?" Brooke's lips parted, but no words came. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders tightening. A silence stretched across the room, thin but suffocating. "It was just paperwork," Ethan finally said. "Nothing was finalized. You have been going through a lot, and we thought it was responsible to prepare." I slid the envelope toward the center of the table. "Open it." He hesitated. Brooke reached for his arm, but eventually Ethan picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside were copies of the documents Jonathan and Clara had shown me, the contract, the account logs, the evaluation request, and Harold's handwritten note. Ethan's face drained of color as he read. Brooke swallowed hard, her composure fracturing. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "this is not what it looks like." "It is exactly what it looks like," I replied. "Your father trusted you, and you used that trust to build a plan around me instead of with me." Brooke tried to speak, but I raised a hand gently, stopping her without anger, only clarity. "Not today, Brooke." She fell silent. I took a slow breath, feeling the lavender medallion press softly against my chest. The scent of memory steadied me. "You both believed I would not notice things, that grief would make me weak, that age would make me silent. But you underestimated me, and you underestimated the man who loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone." Ethan lowered his head, shame flickering across his face. "Mom, we only wanted to make sure you were safe." "Then hear me clearly," I said. "From this moment forward, I decide what safe means for me." The room went utterly still. I stood, my hand pressing lightly on the table for balance. The folder of Harold's documents sat between us, no longer a weight but a boundary. I looked at both of them with a steadiness I had not felt in years. From now on, my life belongs to me. The words were quiet, but they carried more power than anything I had ever spoken. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but the silence around us held him still. Brooke took a small step back as though the truth had pushed her physically. I gestured gently toward the doorway. "I need time. Leave the keys on the table." Neither argued, neither pressed. They stood, gathering themselves carefully, as though afraid one wrong move would shatter what little remained between us. They walked to the door with slow, hesitant steps. When the door clicked shut behind them, the house fell into a profound quiet. For the first time since Harold's death, the silence felt like mine. The house stayed quiet for nearly a full day after I asked Ethan and Brooke to leave. That kind of quiet settles into the walls, into the floorboards, into the air. I moved slowly through the rooms, touching familiar things as if reacquainting myself with a life I had allowed others to oversee. Every so often I found myself resting my hand on the lavender medallion. It felt like the only thing that connected the woman I used to be with the woman I was becoming. By late afternoon, the stillness broke. A car pulled into the driveway. Doors shut. Footsteps approached with a hurried rhythm. Before I could reach the entryway, Ethan and Brooke stepped inside, their faces drawn, tense with emotion. They looked different from the day before, more frantic, more desperate. "Mom," Ethan said sharply, "we need to talk." I closed the door behind them and folded my hands calmly. "Then say what you came to say." He paced once across the living room, then turned on me with a frustration I had not seen since he was a teenager. "Jonathan has manipulated you. He's twisting things to make us look like the bad ones. You cannot trust him." I watched him carefully. "Jonathan showed me documents that you and Brooke submitted or created. How exactly is that manipulation?" "He is lying," Ethan insisted. "He is using Dad's death to turn you against us. He has always been suspicious of me because I ask questions at the company. He does not want me involved in anything." His voice rose with each sentence, but behind the anger, I saw fear of consequences, fear of exposure, and maybe fear of losing control. Brooke stepped forward, her eyes already brimming with tears. "We did not mean to hurt you," she said. "We only wanted you safe. Everything has been so chaotic since Dad passed. You have been forgetting things. You walk around in a fog. We were doing what any responsible family would do." Her voice cracked softly, and she pressed a hand to her chest as if wounded by her own words. It was a performance polished by concern, but my years as a wife and mother had given me a sense for when emotion was genuine and when it was convenient. "I am grieving," I said calmly. "That is not the same as losing my mind." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "We were scared. We lost Dad, and we did not want to lose you too. We thought preparing for worst-case scenarios was the right thing to do. Without telling me," I said. "Without asking me. Without trusting me." He exhaled sharply. "Because you would have refused. You always try to shoulder everything alone." There it was, the core of his fear. Not that I was unstable, but that I would not surrender control. I felt the truth settle inside me with a steady, quiet certainty. Brooke wiped her cheeks, her voice trembling. "We were trying to help. Why can you not see that?" Her tears might have moved me on another day, but I had seen the evaluation request she submitted under her employee account. Tears cannot rewrite a document filed with the intent to reshape another person's future. I walked to the sofa and sat, motioning them to do the same. They hesitated before lowering themselves cautiously, as if the furniture itself had become unfamiliar. "You both believe you acted out of love," I said slowly. "But love without respect becomes control, and control, even wrapped in good intentions, can be harmful." Ethan swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping. For the first time, he looked not angry, but lost. "Mom," I do not want to hurt you. I never did." "Then why did you not trust me with my own life?" I asked gently. He did not answer. The silence between us tightened. A part of me ached. This was my son, the child I raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed, whose nightmares I soothed, whose future I shaped with every sacrifice I made quietly. Now he sat across from me, a grown man grappling with the consequences of fear disguised as responsibility. Brooke broke the silence. "Tell us what you want us to do. We will do it. Just do not cut us out." Her plea carried sincerity, but sincerity is not always the same as accountability. "I want honesty," I said. "I want respect, and I want the space to make my own decisions. I want my autonomy back." Ethan's voice lowered. "Are you going to forgive us?" It was not a simple question. Forgiveness is not a switch flipped by pressure or guilt. It is a journey, a decision earned through change, not asked for in a moment of fear. "I do not know yet," I answered truthfully. "Right now, I am deciding whether forgiveness is possible, not guaranteed." Brooke let out a quiet sob. Ethan stared at the floor. A soft ache settled into my chest. The ache of love. The ache of consequence. The ache of knowing that even when hurt runs deep, the bond between parent and child does not disappear. But it can change. And it had changed. "What happens now?" Ethan asked finally. "Now," I said, "you step back. You let me regain my footing. If you want a place in my life, it will come through respect, not control." Neither argued. Neither defended themselves. They simply nodded, subdued by a truth they had been avoiding. I stood and walked them to the door. There were no hugs, no dramatic tears, only a quiet understanding settled into the space between us. Forgiveness might come someday, or it might not. The choice would be mine. As they walked to their car, I pressed the medallion at my chest, feeling the lavender inside like a gentle heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, I felt the power of choosing myself. The morning after my confrontation with Ethan and Brooke, I woke before the sun rose. The house was wrapped in a cool stillness, the kind that invites a person to think with clarity they have not felt in years. I sat at the edge of my bed, holding the medallion between my fingers. The silver was warm from my touch. The lavender inside seemed to release its faint scent, as if reminding me that quiet strength grows even in the smallest places. For days, the truth had circled around me, pulling tighter with every document, every conversation, every betrayal revealed. But grief has a way of transforming once it finds direction, and I finally felt mine. It was time to make decisions rooted in wisdom, not fear. I dressed, brewed a cup of tea, and stood by the window as the first streaks of dawn cut across the sky. Then I picked up the phone and called Jonathan. "I am ready," I told him. He understood instantly. By late morning, I was sitting again in the 12th floor office with Clara and Jonathan, the same sunlight pouring through the frosted glass. This time, I did not feel small. I felt anchored. Jonathan opened a folder. "Diana, after reviewing everything Harold left and the circumstances surrounding it, our legal team strongly recommends establishing a trust in your name. A trust designed for elder protection. It grants you full control while removing the possibility of unauthorized intervention." I nodded. "Will it prevent Ethan from accessing anything?" "Yes," Jonathan said. "Once the assets are transferred, no family member can override it without your explicit consent or a court order, and even then, the grounds would need to be extraordinary." Clara leaned forward gently. "This is the safeguard Harold wanted for you. He knew your generosity could be used against you. He wanted your future protected." Her words softened something inside me, though the reality remained sharp. My son had positioned himself to take control of my life. The trust would remove that possibility entirely. I looked at the documents laid out before me, legal language, clear boundaries, protection woven into every paragraph. It felt like stepping onto solid ground after weeks of sinking sand. "I want to move everything," I said quietly. "The house, the savings, the insurance policies, whatever Harold left behind." Clara nodded. "We already prepared the transfer documents. All we need is your signature." Jonathan added, "The trust will name you as the sole trustee, no successor unless you choose one. You retain full autonomy." Autonomy, a word that had once seemed too large, too heavy to claim. Now it fit perfectly in my hands. We spent the next hour reviewing the details. Each signature I placed felt like a reclamation. Every stroke of the pen felt like choosing the life Harold believed I deserved. When the final page was signed, Clara gathered the documents with a look of quiet pride. "It is done," she said. I exhaled slowly, not realizing how long I had been holding the breath. The weight on my chest eased, replaced by something steadier. Strength, integrity, ownership of my own future. Jonathan escorted me to the elevator. As the doors slid open, he rested a hand on the frame. "Harold trusted you to finish what he could not. You honored him today." I pressed the medallion through my blouse and nodded. "I hope so." When I returned home, the house greeted me differently. The silence felt peaceful, not hollow. I walked through each room slowly, absorbing the spaces that had once felt threatened by uncertainty. This home had survived storms before. Now it had a foundation anchored in law, protection, and the truth Harold had fought to unveil. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. "Can we talk? Please." I stared at the screen for several moments, then I typed a simple reply. "Not today. I need space." Because the truth was simple. I still loved my son. Love does not evaporate because trust breaks, but love also does not require surrender, not anymore. I stepped outside onto the porch, letting the sunlight warm my face. The wind rustled the lavender bushes near the steps, releasing their quiet fragrance. I touched the medallion gently. For years, I had defined my life by what I gave to others, my sacrifices, my silence, my willingness to bend so others could stand taller. But today marked the first day of standing for myself. Harold had protected me in his final months. Now I was protecting the life we built together. And for the first time, Ethan could not interfere. Not with my home. Not with my choices. Not with my future. The decisions belonged to me now, and I intended to honor them fully. The days that followed moved with a strange, steady rhythm. I woke each morning with a quiet clarity, knowing my home and future were protected. The trust documents were filed. The transfer of assets was complete. For the first time since Harold's passing, I felt grounded in my own life, rather than floating through someone else's plans. But what felt like stability for me became the beginning of something very different for Ethan and Brooke. It started with a phone call from Ethan. His voice sounded thinner than usual, stretched tight like a wire under strain. "Mom, there are complications," he said. "Can we meet?" I agreed to see him on the porch, not inside the house. When he arrived, he looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled, and his eyes carried the heaviness of sleepless nights. He sat on the far end of the bench while I remained near the railing. For a long moment, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, he exhaled hard. "I went to the bank," he said. "The accounts that were open, the ones you saw, they were frozen." I nodded. "That is part of the trust process." He blinked, stunned by how calmly I said it. "Mom, those accounts were holding temporary transfers, money we were relying on to cover things. There were bills, loans." The word hung in the air, loans. I watched him carefully. "How much?" He hesitated. His jaw tightened. "More than you think. It started when Brooke left her job for a while. Then we refinanced the condo, but it did not help. I thought I could use the accounts to keep us afloat until things stabilized." My heart sank. Not in pity, but in recognition. I had seen Harold carry that same weight once. Financial fear mixed with pride strong enough to make a person hide the truth. "What about Brooke's job now?" I asked. Ethan hesitated again. "She left, about a month before Dad died." I turned to him slowly. "Left or lost?" He swallowed. "Lost." The pieces fit together, the urgency, the fear, the need for control, the way Brooke inserted herself into every decision, every conversation, every plan. They had been scrambling, and the quickest solution had been to reposition my life as their safety net. "How much debt are you in?" I asked quietly. He stared at his hands. Too much. A sadness washed over me. Not for the money, but for how far my son had drifted from the values I tried to teach him. Still, sadness cannot erase reality. I folded my hands. Ethan, the trust is irrevocable. I cannot undo it even if I wanted to. He looked up sharply, panic lighting his eyes. Mom, please. We need access to something. Anything. People are calling. Deadlines are closing in. I thought when Dad passed, things would settle. Instead, everything fell apart. His wording made something inside me flinch. When Dad passed. Not when we lost Dad, but when Dad passed. As though Harold's death had been a financial milestone, I inhaled slowly, choosing my next words with precision. Your father and I built what we had with sacrifice and honesty. Those assets are not a patch for careless debt. His face crumpled, frustration rising. This is why we tried to prepare things early. You never understand how hard things are for us. I felt the sting of his words, but they did not sway me. Instead, they clarified something I had been avoiding. You tried to prepare things early by taking control of my accounts, by submitting evaluations about my mind. That was not preparation. That was exploitation fueled by fear. He flinched as if struck. The screen door creaked then, and Brooke stepped outside. She must have been waiting in the car. Her eyes were swollen, her expression brittle. She approached hesitantly, her voice shaking. I told him not to come, she said. We knew you would say no. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they felt different, not manipulative, more like a person watching the last rope snap between her hands. She wrapped her arms around herself. I cannot do this anymore, Ethan. The calls, the notices, the pressure, the lease. I thought I could keep everything balanced, but it is falling apart. Ethan turned sharply. Brooke, not now. She shook her head, stepping back. This is all too much. We built our life on things we could not sustain. I kept thinking if we managed your mother's assets, we could catch our breath. But it was never our right to do that. And now, everything is collapsing. I cannot be the one holding it up anymore. She looked at me then, eyes tired, voice trembling, but clear. I am sorry, Diana, truly. She turned toward the steps. Ethan reached for her wrist, but she pulled away gently. I need space, she whispered. Then she walked to the car, got in, and drove away. Ethan remained on the porch, stunned. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. I watched the struggle ripple through him, the pride, the fear, the grief, the consequences converging all at once. When he finally spoke, his voice broke. I did not want to lose her, and now I have. I do not know what to do, Mom. I looked at him with a tenderness that came from years of motherhood, but also with the firmness I had earned through pain. You face what you created, I said gently, and then you rebuild with honesty instead of fear. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking once, quietly. I placed a hand on the porch railing, steadying myself. I cannot rescue you from this, but I am still your mother. When you choose the truth, you will find me. When you choose control, you will lose me. He nodded slowly, understanding the boundary for the first time. It was not punishment. It was consequence, and it was necessary. In the weeks that followed Brooke's departure and Ethan's unraveling, I began to sense a shift inside myself. It was not sudden or dramatic. It was slow, steady, like the first soft breeze that moves across still water. My home had been protected. My future is secured. Yet something in the house felt too heavy with memory, too full of echoes of what had almost happened. There are places where healing thrives, and places where it struggles. I needed a space that did not look backwards, so I made a quiet decision. One morning, I drove 2 hours north to a small lakeside town Harold and I had visited decades ago on an anniversary trip. It had been July then, the water bright and glittering under the sun. I remembered thinking that if peace had a color, it would match that lake. When I arrived again after all these years, the town looked exactly as I remembered. Wooden docks stretched into calm blue water. Small cottages lined the hill, each painted in soft shades of cream and forest green. The air tasted different here, cleaner, lighter, carrying the faint scent of pine and distant rain. I found a modest cottage for sale along the eastern shore. It was small but solid, with a porch that faced the sunrise. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the difference immediately. The silence was gentle, not lonely. The light landed on the walls in broad, forgiving strokes. It felt like a place where a person could breathe without measuring each exhale. Within a week, the cottage became mine, not through inheritance, not through obligation, through choice. A quiet, powerful choice made entirely on my terms. Moving was simpler than I expected. Most of my belongings remained in the house I placed under the trust. I brought only the things that held meaning: the photo of Harold and me in our early years, the quilt my mother sewed for me when Ethan was born, and my lavender medallion. Everything else felt like clutter from another life. Life in the lakeside town found its rhythm quickly. The first thing I noticed was how warmly people greeted one another. At the grocery store, at the bakery, on the walking trails by the water. It felt like stepping into a softer chapter. Clara visited often. The drive from our old neighborhood was long, yet she made it willingly. Sometimes she brought fresh bread, other times she brought flowers. But most of the time she brought nothing but her presence, which had become one of the most stabilizing parts of my life. One afternoon, as we sat on my porch watching waves lap against the dock, she said, "Harold would be proud of how far you have come." I touched the medallion lightly. I hope so. Some days I feel like I am learning myself all over again. "That is what healing is," Clara replied, not forgetting the hurt, but growing beyond it. Her words settled into me like warm sunlight. To rebuild my days with purpose, I joined the town's reading club, which met every Thursday at the small community library. The group was a mix of retirees, teachers, young mothers, and a few newcomers like me. They welcomed me with easy conversation and gentle curiosity. We discussed novels, memoirs, poetry, and sometimes the things unsaid between the lines. Books gave me a language to understand my own changes. The more I attended, the more I found myself looking forward to those gatherings. They grounded me in a new rhythm, one built not around crisis, but companionship. Outside the cottage, I began clearing a section of soil along the porch. With slow, deliberate care, I planted rows of lavender, soft purple, fragrant, resilient. Each sprig reminded me of the pressed branch Harold had placed in my wedding medallion. Lavender had followed me through grief, truth, betrayal, and rebuilding. Now it would grow in the open, under full light. Every morning I stepped outside, kneeling beside the new plants as they took root. The act of tending to them felt like tending to myself. Steady, patient, forward. Some evenings I wrote in a journal, not long entries, just small reflections, gratitude for the quiet, strength gained from boundaries, hope rising in unexpected ways. And though Ethan and I exchanged a few messages, I learned something important. Love can remain without allowing intrusion. Compassion can exist without surrendering autonomy. I left the door open for him, not wide but not locked either. Healing needs space on both sides. As the lavender grew stronger, so did I. This lakeside town did not erase the past. It simply gave me enough room to grow beyond it. Life in the lakeside town settled into a peaceful rhythm. Days passed with the softness of rippling water, and healing began weaving itself quietly into the corners of my life. I spent my mornings tending to the lavender, my afternoons reading on the porch, and my evenings walking along the shoreline where the sunset painted the lake in warm shades of amber. It was not a dramatic rebirth. It was a gentle unfolding, the kind that lets a person rediscover themselves one breath at a time. Then one morning, as I opened the mailbox at the end of the gravel path, I found an envelope with Ethan's handwriting on it. The sight of his name stopped me where I stood. A breeze moved across the water behind me, carrying the scent of pine and the distant hum of boats. I held the envelope for a long moment before walking back to the porch. I sat on the wooden bench, Zee. The same bench where Clara and I had shared quiet conversations. I traced the edges of the envelope before finally opening it. The paper inside trembled slightly in my hand, though I could not tell if it was my fingers or the breeze. The letter began simply, "Mom, I am sorry." I read each line slowly. Ethan's handwriting wavered in a few places, as if he had paused often. He wrote about the fear he had tried to ignore, the pressure he had tried to handle, the mistakes he could no longer defend. He confessed to the choices he made under panic, the influence he accepted without questioning, the justification he convinced himself of when bills piled up and solutions seemed scarce. He wrote, "I thought I was doing what any responsible son would do. I thought controlling the situation would protect you, but I see now that it was not protection. It was fear disguised as responsibility." He apologized for the accounts he opened, for the evaluations submitted without my knowledge, for the pain he caused when he claimed I was not of sound mind. There was no denial, no excuses. He ended with a plea. "I want to be better than what I became. I want you to trust me again someday. I am starting therapy. I am taking responsibility for the debts. I am trying to rebuild the part of me that Dad believed in. I hope you can forgive me one day. But even if you cannot, I needed to tell you the truth." When I finished reading, the weight of the words settled into me. Not heavy, just honest. Ethan was not fixed. He was not transformed. But he was beginning. And beginnings, however fragile, carry their own kind of courage. I folded the letter gently and placed it beside the lavender medallion resting on the table. My fingers lingered on the cool silver surface. "If one day you change through action," I whispered softly, "I will know." Forgiveness is not a door that swings open with a single apology. It is a bridge built slowly, one plank at a time. And standing on that porch, I knew I could allow the possibility of that bridge without crossing it yet. The lake shimmered under the early sun as I stood and walked toward the lavender garden. The plants had grown taller, fuller, their purple blossoms nodding in the breeze. I knelt down, running my hands gently through the flowers. Their scent rose around me, subtle and reassuring. For so many years, my identity had been stitched to the needs of others. Ethan's needs, Harold's needs, the demands of family, the expectations of motherhood. Every sacrifice I made was tied to someone else's story. But here, among the lavender I planted with my own hands, I felt something shift inside me. A small click, like the gentle closing of a door behind me and the slow opening of a new one ahead. All my life I had been someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's support. Now, for the first time, I was simply myself. The thought settled over me like sunlight warming the skin. "Throughout my life, I have always been the mother of someone," I whispered into the quiet morning. "Today, for the first time, I am myself." The words did not echo. They landed. They belonged. I stood slowly, brushing soil from my hands. Across the lake, the wind pushed soft waves toward the shore. Healing does not erase what happened. It rewrites what comes next. And what came next for me was a life built on boundaries, truth, and gentle courage. Before stepping back inside the cottage, I turned once more toward the water and let the breeze carry away the remnants of a sayin. Life lived in silence. Then I looked at the camera of this story, imagining the listeners who might be walking through their own storms, their own painful revelations, their own quiet awakenings. "If you were in my place," I said softly, "would you cut off your child? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your story." Because healing grows stronger when shared, and sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is speak their truth out loud.